This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo. This week, Koom talks with Vanessa Davis, creator of Spaniel Rage, Make Me a Woman, and Out of Time. Koom and Vanessa discuss the difference between liking a work and identifying with it, the pitfalls of reporting in your comics on what your family members do, like that time with her mom in the museum, her painting, the difference between women drawn by men and women drawn by women, and more. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. We'll then get a percentage of what you spend. It costs you nothing extra and helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of presenting this show every week. We really appreciate your support.
This is Koom for Deconstructing Comics, and I'm talking to Vanessa Davis in LA. She has just re-released her first book, Spaniel Rage, from Drawn and Quarterly. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. It's just been a long week, and things are crazy. But it's really great to connect with you, and I'm so happy that you agreed to do this interview.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. I really liked your review. So I was happy to answer more questions.
Oh, thanks. One thing I kind of noticed in reading, because when I wrote the review, I didn't really look to see what else other people had written. But when preparing for this interview, I did. And I noticed a couple of things. There's sort of a consensus, I think, about your work. And so some of the things I felt and that I wrote just came up, like the fact that people felt that there was something kind of familiar about your work, or that there was something very gentle about it, but at the same time it was a little bit maybe saucy or bold or something like that. But the thing I noticed, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, is that I think most of the people who've reviewed you or who have interviewed you are women.
Yeah, I mean, I have done interviews with men, and I have been reviewed by men. But definitely, I think that there is I definitely think that I connect with women readers, and I know that, you know, some of them have yeah, I mean, I think it's a mix, but definitely there's a connection with women readers.
Yeah, I think one of them, I just can't remember which one, was saying that reading your stuff, she felt like you were her friend, and then later you became her friend. I didn't feel that, maybe because I'm a guy, but I did feel a kind of fascination with, I think, a sort of glimpse into the world of women, or there was something a little bit intimate about your work that I felt really drew me in.
Well, certainly, I mean, the Spaniel Rage is not exactly a diary, you know, but it's diaristic, and so that kind of creates like an intimate frame, and then I think that, like, you know, I think that I don't write about anything that foreign. Like, I don't think it's I don't think my experiences or even my viewpoint, you know, is super unusual. So I think that a lot of people who read it can relate, at least. And then people I know who have a different viewpoint, they've said that they relate also. I'm not, you know, totally. I think that, like, relating is a thing that happens with a lot of autobiographical and memoir work, you know, writing, where readers relate or they don't, and it's like a different aspect of evaluation than in you know, fiction or other kinds of storytelling. You know, like, obviously when I watch a James Bond film, I don't relate to James Bond, but, like, I still enjoy the film. But I do think that people read autobio to kind of, like, see they want to see glimpses of another person's life or learn about another. I don't know. I like to read autobiographical writing because I just feel like it helps me kind of like expand my horizons as well as maybe reinforce like ideas that I or opinions that I might have. And I'm sort of speaking generally, but and I'm rambling, but
yeah, it's okay.
But I do think that it's just kind of the nature of I think it's like the nature of autobiography to a large extent.
Yeah, I mean, you have said that there's something deliberate about what you do, and I think what you're doing is sort of not just autobiography or, like you said, a diary, but more like an essay, the kind of the personal essay, except it's in pictorial form. So there's a couple of things I would ask. One is, do you see yourself kind of part of a group or a movement or something, maybe not intentionally, but like when you were talking about diaristic comics, I was thinking of Gabrielle Bell's work. But I'm also thinking of maybe Jillian Tamaki, not that she does anything autobiographical, but there's maybe something similar in terms of moments with women characters and that kind of thing. Do you see yourself as part of a group or a movement at all?
I mean, I definitely admire and like both of those, cartoonists. It's interesting. I mean, when I got involved in comics, Gabrielle had been doing comics for a while, and I had only been like sort of exposed to like a limited amount of comics at that point, and a lot of what I had been exposed to was by women. Like I had read the Twisted Sisters anthology in high school, and and had sort of like.
So can you just tell me who are some of the memorable people from that anthology that stick out? Is that like an 80s kind of thing?
Yeah, it's like that was a 90s anthology. It was edited. Oh, I don't want to get it wrong, but like Diane Newman helped put it together, and Aileen Crum was in it, and
was it like a Mary Fleener kind of Carol Tyler?
Mary Fleener, yeah, Mary Fleener and Mary Fleener, Carol Tyler, and like Dame Darcy, and
got it.
All these people were in it. Phoebe Blackner was in it. I remember that like I really, really loved the Debbie Drexler story in there, and
yeah, she was one of the persons I kind of see connections with your work with, and she just sort of disappeared. I think she did a comic called, what was it called, Nowhere or something like that for DQ.
Yeah. Well, yeah. She actually, what's funny is that she actually lived in Santa Rosa, which is where I used to live for, and so it was like kind of amazing that she was my neighbor. She lived like a few blocks away. But,
that's incredible. What was she doing?
She was doing illustration. She was like she had kind of transitioned into doing more illustration and a lot of nature drawing. But like beautiful nature drawing. But yeah, I guess what I'm getting at in terms of the movement is that I didn't realize, even though I knew about it, I think I had internalized, the fact of the legacy of women's autobiographical comics, because I had seen a lot of comics that were overtly autobiographical, but then also just sort of like felt autobiographical, but were fiction, or just some kind of murky mix of the two. And then when I got into it, so when I had gotten into it, I had only done fine art before, and I never really could figure out what I was. I didn't know whether I was a painter or what. And but one thing that I had always liked to portray in my paintings and drawings were stories of my real life, and I liked kind of the play of that, like the mundanity of the actual stories that I was painting, with the way they became sort of elevated by being immortalized in like paint, you know, or like in an image. I kind of like, I sort of thought there was like a funny frisson there. So when I got involved in comics, I was like, I wasn't really thinking about comics. I was mostly thinking about, you know, like in Spaniel Rage, I said I was going to do like one drawing a day. And for me, it just was kind of implicit that it would be a story about my life, because that's what I always drew about. And it didn't occur to me until I was kind of like well involved in comics and like maybe even already, you know, like published at that point, that that maybe what my niche was, that I like didn't know what it was maybe my niche was autobiography, or, you know, like autobiography is like a literary genre or like a literary category, not a fine art category. And so I just hadn't thought about it in those terms because I was thinking from a fine art perspective, I guess. Anyway, in terms of your question though, sorry, I'm really rambling.
No, that's okay. Let it ramble. Let it go.
Okay. In terms of your question, you know, like when I got involved and I saw Gabrielle's comics, I was like, oh, this is like totally up my alley. I love these comics, you know, and then, obviously like Jillian's comics are so beautiful and amazing and impressive, but to me it seems like, I don't know, at the same time though, I feel like we're like, just even those two other artists, I feel like the three of us are all so different.
Right. What about Lisa Hannawalt? Do you feel like your stuff is more like Lisa's at all, or?
Not really. I mean, I think like, you know, I guess, you know, the thing, I guess what I'm saying is that I think that like comics are so personal and idiosyncratic.
Right.
But yes, of course, to like, even a really devoted and like in the mix, you know, an insider reader, like they would probably put all four of us, you know, in the same category. But to me, I feel like our personalities are so different, and our techniques and our like abilities and like all these different aspects of what we do are so different that it seems hard to compare us. But I mean, that's like not really my job, I guess. I feel like it's not really. It's not.
And you're resisting it. You're resisting that kind of thing. I get it. I'm not trying to.
I guess it's just not. It just isn't really. It's like it's not really constructive for me. Like I understand that it works. I understand the purpose of it for like readers and for booksellers and, you know, like anyone else. But for me as an artist, I just don't really. It seems kind of like counterproductive, I guess, to kind of think in those terms.
Absolutely. You mentioned the title of the book, Spaniel Rage, and I remember, like, I was just totally puzzled. I mean, I had some ideas as to why it might be called that, but then I read in an interview that you came across this term as a way to describe a condition that English Cocker Spaniels have. And I was just wondering, do you still feel that kind of applies to your ongoing work at all?
Yeah.
Yeah? Go for it. Okay.
I mean, sure. I you know, it's different because I'm an older person than I was when I started making comics. And, you know, it was like a mix of a lot of things when I came up with the title. I had never heard anything like it, and it just was so funny to me and like so weird. And also sad, you know, because I think a lot of times the dogs are killed, you know, after they've kind of come down with the, it's like awful. But so, I just kind of liked that. I liked the mix of like absurd and funny and sad, because it's sort of meshed with like my three main my head bases, I think.
Right.
And then also, if you like, as you probably read, like I was, you know, I just kind of felt like, you know, I was like a new adult, and it was like I was constantly kind of coming up against these moments where I had to kind of contend with like not being a kid anymore, you know?
Right.
So like, and as a kid, to get by, you can get that from many different ways. For me, I was like a good girl, and I was a good student, and I I was like the obedient daughter, and I didn't really get in trouble. And but then as I got older, I found that a lot of the things that I did, whether or not I was rebelling or like most of the time I was just trying to like figure out what I wanted to do on my own, and it disturbed my parents, or it like caused me problems no matter what. As an adult, getting by the way I had as a kid, it was disturbing to people, like my boss. Like, you weren't a kid anymore. You had to like think for yourself. You had to be assertive. You had to not be a baby anymore. And like, that was always like kind of, it was like dizzying, toggling between like the two different kind of identities that I was like transitioning between. And then also I found that like, I was like mad and disappointed and like angry about a lot of things. And there was like definitely no place, like it definitely was not like welcome,
Right.
Like no one wants to hear like a 23-year-old whining about anything or like angry about anything. And that doesn't mean it's not valid,
Sure.
I don't know. It's like I think it was sort of like instinctive when I picked it
right.
as a title, and then as I like worked with it and stayed with it, I like thought about all the ways that it kind of made this like perfect sense. But yeah, I guess I still feel
it's a great title. But it's very mysterious because I don't think most people know what it means.
No, I mean, I don't think it is the obvious thing at all. But and I think that too is like part of like, I think like when I was, that was a quality that I like wrestled with getting into comics. Because one thing that had kind of kept me out of comics for a long time was that I was afraid, like when I was a painter, when I was studying painting rather, one thing that I liked about what I was doing with my work was that it didn't have any words and it intrigued people. People were like, whoa, like, what's this? And it would literally be a painting of like me and my boyfriend in a car, like having a conversation or something. But like something like totally, pedestrian, but like, right. But because I had like put it in this painting and had like painted it beautifully or like whatever, people were like interested, and I felt like I liked that thing that happened where when I would talk, I would often say too much. I would often like talk too much and like get too into it and ramble. And I was afraid that when I added words to my images, I would do the same thing, and like lose the intrigue that I had in my wordless images. And so what was my point of bringing that up?
I don't know, but every time you talk, I go to like 5 different things. So I'm just waiting to find out. You come back. No, it's great. It's just I wish we could like have like these alien brains that could like follow all these different tracks, and I could have like 2 conversations with you simultaneously.
That's story of my life. Yeah, me too. Yeah.
But
let me ask me at any point.
Okay, let me come back to Spaniel Rage. Then, like for me, I thought when I read your earlier stuff, and your more recent stuff is very different, or at least it is to me. But the earlier stuff to me, it was so pretty, and I had to say, like you remember, like I was really affected by that story, like 8 years ago or whenever I read it, and I've seen a couple of these things. I thought you were the prettiest of those artists, like that I would see, the kind of like the new up and coming. And what I found interesting about the title Spaniel Rage, and also like reading the comics, is because it speaks to kind of like a tension in the prettiness. Like, in my review, I described it like frosting, but I'm sure other reviewers have described it better. There's a real prettiness to young Vanessa and her friends and like their adventures in those, daily kind of entries. And at the same time, though, there's a kind of like an edge to them. And like you say, there's a kind of anger. So that prettiness, and I know you've talked about it in interviews too, is sort of like a side of struggle, at least for you at that age, working on that stuff. Because even your character says at times, I just want boys to tell me I'm pretty, but at the same time, grr, 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 grr. And so did you see your art that way, or did it just naturally kind of exhibit that?
I wanted it to be pretty. I've always wanted myself to be pretty, and I've always wanted my work to be pretty. Like before I sort of reconciled myself to being a narrative artist, I wanted to be like a textile designer and like be a decorative artist.
Yeah. And that comes through. For sure.
It comes through, but it like never really quite, like I also like, I can't help but kind of like ruin it with like kind of the truth or something. Like I think when I was younger, it was sort of like the truth of like me figuring out how to draw comics, or even just how to draw, or even just like the emotions of what I was writing about. So I think that is definitely, I've never, I've just sort of like tried to own it, to like own both. Like I'm not really, prettiness is still important to me, but I know it's not everything. And even if it is everything, like I'm not capable of getting there 100%.
Well, look, your art has changed, and you don't seem to strive for that kind of prettiness or cuteness anymore. Like I was, I hadn't read the more recent stuff, so when you pointed me to it online, and I read it, I was like, she's never really smiling in any of these, and also your self is more reserved. There was something kind of adorable about the younger Vanessa. She'd always be stumbling, or she'd be expressive, or her mouth would often be open as she thought, like, what if, blah, 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 blah. Whereas, like, you're often kind of a bit pinched in terms of your expression. It's more flatter, it doesn't have the same roundedness. Yeah. I don't know if you've deliberately done that. Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's like a mix. I think it's organic, I think it's like, I've been through more things and, I'm, I'm more weathered, both like physically and emotionally and like, circumstantially. It's funny. I have a friend who was talking about dating younger women, and he was saying, women my age are crazy. And I just got, and he's, like my age, and it's
okay. So he's like late 40s?
like 40.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was like, that's so annoying, because it's like, of course, like, I think the average 23-year-old, like, is, like, hopefully, like, if they've been lucky, which I was, they're like full of optimism and like, and, there's pressure to like do things the right way when you're 23, but like, you also know that you're young and you can make mistakes and like, you have all the time in the world to figure stuff out. Whereas I am sort of also, the newer comics that I did recently, they were kind of coming back into comics after I hadn't made any for a few years. And I had some like really challenging experiences in my life, like, just personally and professionally. And I had like a lot of different feelings about it. Like on the one hand, it's harder. I've found it harder to write about my personal life. Partly because I don't really feel like I don't really feel as like generous with it, because it's more important in a way, and I like share it with another person, and it's not as like kind of up for grabs in a sense.
Right.
And then also like I had this experience managing this apartment complex that I know that sounds silly, but it was so disturbing, and it was like such a tough experience for me. And it made me, it really took me to like a very dark place in terms of like how I saw people in general.
Yeah, you did a comic on it. I felt like that could have been a book. There was just so much, right?
Yeah, I haven't figured that out, but it's like, but you know, like I really thought, I was like, LA is evil and like people are scum, and so I think that you know, I think that I don't really feel that way anymore.
Are you living in a different neighborhood now?
Yeah, I live in a different neighborhood, and like everything is like a million times better. But and you know, and like the experience was like a really big learning experience, as any horrible experience like can be. But how
long did you do it for?
Like not that long, like a year and a half.
That's still a long time. That sounds torturous.
It was a while. Yeah. Well, it was just a very high stress. It was very high stress. It was like supposed to be, you know, I think a lot of people move to LA to
make it,
be mellow and like have fun. Well, I mean, yeah, either to make it or to like have fun and like romp in the sunshine and like, you know, claim eternal youth or something. And then we moved here, and it was just like an immediate crush of stress where like we were responsible for all of these like people, and they were all nuts, and they were all like so intense and and I just was so not prepared for it.
I'm just kidding.
Really? Well, you're a teacher, right?
I teach high school, and sometimes I can't believe I lasted this long. But I think I'm just also an introvert. And so for me, it's very difficult to deal with difficult people, which there are many teachers who are and students who are. And I think it's also just, I only have so much before, you know, things start breaking me down. And that's happened this week. It's burnout and just... I was supposed to go to the Toronto Comic Jam yesterday, and I went out and hung out with like a coworker and his 2-year-old daughter, and it was lovely, and I just totally forgot. I just literally forgot, and I came home, and I checked my phone, and I was like, this is not a good sign, like usually not that far gone. But yeah, sorry, to get back to your thing, obviously you had these people that you couldn't get away from because you had financial obligations that you had to meet, and you were stuck in the...
Well, like, yeah, I was living there, so it was like, you know, living at work.
Yeah.
But I mean, you know, it's obviously not like it just was it was a weathering experience. So I think that probably I think I did approach those comics with more ambivalence and caution than I had when I was younger.
Well, did you ever run into Joe Matt? I believe he lives in LA now.
I never have. I know he lives here, but I've never met him or seen him.
I feel like he'd be on your list of problematic male cartoonists, but his old stuff sense of humor was great, and yours is too. And like I sometimes, you know, meet up with Chester, who used to hang out with him and, you know, be part of his close circle, and he said that Joe would ruin his relationships with his kind of very exposed kind of cartooning, and so now he's got a girlfriend and they've been together for a long time and it's working well, and he sort of realized that if you don't, you know, use that as grist, then it doesn't ruin the relationship, so that's the trade-off. And I noticed that you hardly ever talk about Trevor, like maybe he makes like the most, you know, innocuous of cameos in your work, so that must have been a decision you've made very early on.
Yeah. I mean, I think I feel like I have to, I mean, writing about other people has been kind of a long-term project that I'm still figuring out. I'm lucky in that my mom and sister are pretty much fine with me writing about them. Like my sister loves it.
My family doesn't, so you're very lucky.
Yeah, I know. I am lucky. And they also, it's like they're so performative in the way that they act that like it makes it kind of it like writes itself, you know, in a lot of ways. But even with their attitudes as like supportive as they are, I've wrestled with like I remember I wrote this comic about for the Paris Review, and it was like it had like my mother visiting, and it had this one panel where she's like caressing this giant, like it looks like a giant dildo made out of hematite at like the Natural History Museum. And And
did she actually lift it up at the museum, or did you exaggerate?
She lifted it up, but no, it's too big to lift. But she was like, running her hands up and down at like totally like a giant dildo. And I was just like, and she did it, and like she did it, and I'm allowed to like write about it. But I like woke up that morning and I was like, fuck, like I'm such a, like I just felt like I was exploiting my mother, and like I just felt like immediately like full of shame, and I was like, maybe I should call them and like have them not post it, and then I like overcame it, and my mom was totally fine with it. But it's like I think about who I write about.
Like any good writer, I think you're just full of self-consciousness and self-doubt and whatever. But whenever I see your mom or your sister, it's usually there for humor, and it's really good stuff. I don't think it bashes them, or it doesn't dig into stuff that's really toxic or whatever. Like I think you do a very good job of treating them
Thank
well.
you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying. I mean, it's also like, but then also I don't want to try it too much, because that also is like, to be a good writer, you have to like let loose, and I've been criticized for that, like where I don't like, I don't like get into anything too personal or too painful. So, it's like, it's very murky. It's very complicated. And I was hoping that maybe if I wrote more about my apartment manager experience, it would be good. It would kind of be good, practice to write about other people. 'Cause I usually don't really write about people unless I like love and respect them. 'Cause if I love and respect them, then that's like they're in it no matter what I'm saying,
You're
like,
a good
it's
soul.
been rare that I've written.
Most people would not. And I like, if I don't like somebody, I'd probably use my spite or whatever. I'd get it out of the page.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote one comic about someone that about someone who I had a falling out with, and I like drew her the.
I remember that one. Like, well, the clowny person, right?
Yeah, but she's someone I didn't like, and I wrote about her, and it wasn't really with like. I'm just saying it's.
You
did
a good job of
constantly...
not self-sacrificing yourself on that one. That was good. I like it.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just difficult. Like I think that like I wanna be open and write about my life, but I also don't really.
Yeah.
I feel like it's important to be thoughtful about it.
Fair enough. And you're a good person for thinking about that. I mean, the only thing I would say is, I think I sense in interviews and stuff, and yourself, that there's just this real urge not to be tied down or not to pander to what people want. So whether it's autobiographical comics or it's a consistent diary comic or whatever, but yet, like, once again, reading the earlier stuff, it just sort of becomes a book in and of itself. Like when I read Make Me a Woman, even though some bits are sort of diary comics and some bits are strips and whatever, they all become sort of this narrative of your life, even though it's told in like almost like mosaic pieces or something like that. And
yes.
Yeah, and then the whole book then sort of becomes a diary, just not a consistent one. And then that diary then becomes your life, and then you and your sister and your mom, who are sort of consistent characters in that story, you want more and you want continuity, and or at least that's what I feel. And then I can really see that you're really trying to resist that in the more recent stuff, in the Paris Review stuff. You're not going for that style, and you're going for, sorry, go on, you want to get in there.
No. What do you think? I'm interested to hear what you think is like. What about it is different in terms of those?
Okay, there's a number of things I think that are different. But one thing is, you even mentioned in one of them, like, look, I'm going to get to the point. Just hold on. I'm going to get there when I get there. And then you jump around, and it doesn't give you the same kind of, like, to use artistic terms, pleasure. And it's very interesting because I think you're always somewhat reflective and somewhat personal. So you give us that, what you called in an interview. I'm trying to find it in my notes. Of course I can't. But it's sort of like there's a gristle or there's a grit in the prettiness that you always kind of come back to, but it jumps around and they're kind of meandering, and so I don't know sort of what to make of them. So it's harder to enter your life or to enter your picture that you're painting. And that's interesting. Interesting, yeah. It's very different from the other stuff.
I really think that's cool how, I don't know, what you said about not wanting to give people what they want.
Yeah.
Yeah, be pinned down. It's like, I definitely agree with that. I didn't want to be, when I got into comics book, I didn't want panels. I didn't want to like have to plan ahead. I wanted to like figure it out as I went.
Yeah.
And I also think that like I've had, because of I've never, I think, it's so interesting. Okay, sorry. I'm just
take a moment, think about it. It is hard.
I think that I've always had sort of this like unfinishedness. Like when I was in school, I was like, well, this shows a lot of promise. I wonder like if it could lead to something that I'll actually do right, you know? And it never happened. Like I never got to something that like where like if I touched 100% of it, it was complete. It always was like.
But that's what makes Make Me a Woman so rich. It does have a kind of a bit of a gristle to it, a lot of gristle to it. But it's also very rich. There are things growing out all over the place around your work. But that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about being really polished and like achieving the full potential of whatever aim you're going for.
Yeah, and that's fine. I've always been like I sort of like am comfortable with that. Like I wrote in the introduction of Spaniel Rage, like I saw like a lot of merit in letting like an external force kind of finish the work, like the way like I saw my teacher Ken's small paintings. He just did like something every day, and then at the end of it, like by nature of time just passing and like showing up and making something every day, it like turned into something bigger, larger than the sum of its parts.
Right.
And I've always sort of like believed in that because that's just kind of how things have always worked for me. And like, when I do try to touch every part of it, it doesn't come out as good, So like for me, it's like I have to leave room for like the magic of like the alchemy of like half effort and half like circumstances, kind of pulling something together. And that's sort of like what the title "Make Me a Woman" kind of speaks to, also, because it's like you're an adult, you're supposed to be taking all of this responsibility, but then if you can't take like, but then here I am, like kind of like leaving it up to like time and circumstances to create a book out of all the like drips and drabs that I've kind of created. And I know that it's there, but I didn't do it intentionally.
Sure.
So it's sort of like a weird thing. Like, did I do it or didn't I do it?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think some people have said that it seems like your early stuff just kind of sprang fully formed. But what you did was, out of the things that you were not familiar with, like using panels, which you didn't want to constrain your stuff, or you didn't want things to kind of, move in that comic booky kind of pace, you made something like really unique and something really interestingly organic, something so uniquely yourself. But the more recent stuff is kind of a bit more like, you talked about the panel as helping you focus something in a way that works really well. But at the same time, I don't know if it has a strong sense of identity, but also it might be, like, as you say, like you're in a very different place now from your 20s, and maybe the energy you feel is different. Maybe you don't feel the anger and the ambition so keenly. I don't know. So go ahead.
Well, I guess I think my identity does sort of waver in a way, like, and I think that might be, I know from friends that, like, that's a thing that happens as you get older, you know, like, you're kind of, like, less interested in your own story, you're less interested, like, you're less, like, all about your own viewpoint, you know, you maybe become partners, you maybe become a parent, you, like, have all of these other viewpoints that you're sort of forced to incorporate into your worldview, and it sort of, like, mitigates, like, the purity of your own perspective, I think. I'm not a mother, and I'm not even, like, an employee anywhere, so I don't have that much, but I definitely know that, like, I definitely felt mitigated when I was working in the apartment building. I was like, I didn't even feel like I definitely didn't feel like a cartoonist, and I almost kind of, like, barely felt like myself. And so right. I think that maybe that's coming out whether I like it or not. And I also think that it's interesting that you say that, just because about the newer work, just because I know that I was kind of being more ambitious with, like, with how coherent I was being, like with the arguments I was making. Like, I sort of, I think the earlier work was sort of just like, like, you know, here's a prompt Hanukkah, or here's a prompt, like, you know, therapists or something. And I would just sort of, like, talk about my experiences with them, and then, like, loosely connect them to, like, you know, some broader thoughts. But, like, now I'm like, the world is garbage, and this is why, and it's expressed through the way cars are designed, you know, and it's like these very tenuous, like, you know, like, tenuous things that I feel sure about, but I have a hard time articulating. And then I'm, like, using the comics to try to make my point.
Right. So was I right?
It's really hard because
you're less happy in the more modern comics. Like, you seem, but I don't know. It's not expressed directly.
I don't know. I mean, I think I don't know if I'm less happy, because I know I felt really, like, lost and forlorn when I was younger too. You know, as well as optimistic. I think I also was like, if I've reacted to anything, if I've, like, spoken to the world of comics in any way in my comics, I think it's that when I did get into comics, I was reading all of these, like, you know, 90s era, like, acerbic, cynical, male viewpoints, or, like, not even male. A lot of women cartoonists had the same kind of viewpoint back then, where that was, like, you know,
axe to grind kind of thing.
Yeah, like, dark and negative, and, like, always like, the ending was always that, like, the person died, or, like, you know, whatever. And I remember talking about it with a friend, where he, like, you know, because like, a friend from high school, when I started getting in, who's a writer, and he and I were, like, reading a lot of comics together, and he was like, and he's my friend who's, like, always kind of been unapologetically, like, not edgy. Like, he's like, he doesn't want to be, he's not edgy, and he doesn't want to be, and he's like, and he has no problem with that. He's always, like, kind of, like, stayed safe and, like, made good decisions, and, like, you know, kept himself out of trouble. And he was like, he just, like, didn't relate to, like, the edgy viewpoint. And he was like, everyone is so, like, dour and angry. And I was like, and I think I wanted to react to that in a way, just because I, like, felt like it was, like, the kind of thing that I could react to, because I liked being, I knew that I had things to say, but I also knew that I was, like, I sort of, like, enjoyed being kind of, like, silly and, like, I remember being described in a review once as, like, daffy, and I, like, sort of, like, liked that, because it's, you know, like,
yeah, that's where I see, like, your earlier character is always kind of stumbling, or there's something kind of bouncy about her, and, like, not clownish in a negative way, but in a really funny, wonderful kind of way, like, adorable.
Well, it's so like wonderful to be like, I was so lucky, you know, I was like living in New York, and I had like this wonderful apartment, and like I had like this wonderful job. I was like so broke, you know, but I like, it was fine, you know, like like it was just like a really like magical, unusual, like, you know, it's a time that you don't really get to have, you know, like forever. So it really documents that period. And I wouldn't say that like my life is that hard now at all, but it's like, it's definitely
less bouncy.
I don't know. It's heavier. It's like heavier, and it's like kind of more, you know, there's less time to just like dick around and like there's like, I have to make decisions, you know, like if I have to decide, like I have to decide if I'm going to have a baby, or like where I'm going to live, you know, or like these kinds of things that I had forever to decide before.
Well, this age, I'm not that much older than you, but this age is kind of great, and it sucks. But maybe every age is like that, you know, in its way. And I always think, like, sometimes I really despair about one thing or another, like the baby thing or whatever. And then I always think, like, imagine myself, like, being a generation older and then looking back. Because, you know, probably all of us think, like, if I could go back to being, you know, 24 with what I know now, or if I could appreciate what I had when I was 24. So I just imagine myself being like 65 and going and thinking back, going like, oh my God, to be 40 was amazing. Like, I didn't know how good I had it. So I just sort of tried to like jump forward and look back.
Yeah, no, I think that we absolutely will. And just the other day, I was having dinner with a friend of mine I don't know how old she is, but she has a daughter who's like in her mid-20s. Yeah. But she was saying how like she was like, you know, I was kind of speaking to this idea, and she like just immediately dismissed me, and she was like, you still have all the time in the world. So it's like, I guess, I mean, she's, you know, I don't really have all the time in the world for like having a baby, but like, you know, it's like, but like, and that thing that you said about like not wanting to be tied down, I think that was like, that has always been, I actually was just talking about this in therapy today, and I was saying how
is this therapy round two? The bill's going to be in the morning, David. No, go ahead.
It's just interesting how it like kind of ties into it, because I was saying how like, you know, I think that as a young person, especially as like, I'm a young person like me who was so like obedient and like, and like, you know, I strive to like
fit in.
I strive to fit in and like do well. You know, I think that a lot of my identity was tied up in all of the potential that I had, and like all of the wonderful things I might do one day.
Right.
You know, and like, and that is touchy, because when you get older, it's like, it's not really about that anymore. It's about like fulfilling some of those, you know, some of that potential, and like making decisions and making good on some of those. Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, so it's, it gets to be less appropriate to like, you know, it gets to be kind of like less fun to not be tied down. Like there is something to be said for being tied down, and like the things that can offer, you know, both in life and also in like creatively, I think.
Yeah.
Coming up, did winning the Terry Southern Prize have any impact on her life? The difference between women drawn by men and women drawn by women, and more. Support our podcast and get additional video and audio files by making a monthly donation at patreon.com/deconcomics. If you'd rather make a one-time donation, you can do so through PayPal. Send it to donate@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support.
Are you willing to follow me on a journey and risk getting lost in a swirling maze of past ages, protected only by our red indestructible capes as we break through the final unexplored realm of the time barrier to explore the fantastic Silver Age adventures of the world's greatest hero, Superman? If so, join me each week on the Superman Fan Podcast, as together we'll follow the Man of Steel, his cousin Supergirl, and his closest friends, Perry White, Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, Lana Lang, Batman and Robin, and others in Superman's never-ending quest to defend truth and justice in the pages of Action Comics, Superman, World's Finest Comics, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, and Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane. Go to the supermanfanpodcast.blogspot.com, available on iTunes and most other podcast aggregators. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Medium, Flipboard, and Stitcher. And after you listen, feel free to send email to supermanfanpodcast@gmail.com. And unless you request otherwise, I look forward to reading your comments on future episodes. And don't forget to wear your red indestructible cape, standard safety equipment for traveling through the time barrier.
Let's talk about something wonderful that has happened recently. You won the Terry Southern Prize at the Paris Review for that series of more recent pieces that you did. And somehow I found that was indicative sort of of you, because it's not an Eisner, it's a literary prize. And I just thought, because you sort of seem to be kind of in these kind of like potential fields in between the world of art and the world of literature and the world of comics. And I was wondering, has your life changed or been impacted at all by winning this prize? Would it have been different if you'd won an Eisner for it?
I don't know. I've never won an Eisner, so I have no idea what that does. This was like a wonderful experience. It was just so fun, first of all, and it was so, it's wonderful to get an award. I never really had won many awards before this. And then, coming from the Paris Review is like so fancy and like wonderful, and then, and they had a party, and it's like this amazing party, and I like had a great dress, and like there was an after party in a mansion, and it's just like, you talk, getting to talk with all of these like wonderful people at the party. It's great. It's like one day, but it's wonderful. I don't know. It remains to be seen if it like really is going to change anything in my life. If any, I know that it's like, it's both it's definitely bolstering, it's like very good for morale. But yeah, I don't know.
You often mention your dad, or others mention your dad in interviews, and I love that article where they talk about the book of his photos that you helped put together, and I just loved seeing his photos and some of those photos with you, like the sense of wit, and all of that. But you never really talk about what your mom did, and from what I gather, she was a freelance writer. So I was wondering, is it kind of too simplistic to say that maybe you got a pictorial sense from your dad and a written sense from your mom and somehow put them together? Or what is it that your mom gave you that,
I think my mom gave me a lot. She's like, it's interesting. I think I like, my mom has a really crazy sense of humor, like that daffy, like kind of absurd sense of humor is like definitely I get from her.
But your dad has a sense of absurd wit in his photographs too, like especially like the one where you're on the subway, or my favorite one is where you're peeking at the cat. Like there's such a sense of humor about these photos.
No, they're insane. No, I totally agree. I think that, that they related, on that. And,
on that level. Okay.
Yeah, and, it's hard to say where it starts and stops. I definitely think that, my dad had a really strong sense of humor. He was, like, the goofy, fun dad. And and my mom was sort of like the serious, like, she was sort of like more, when he was alive, she was like more intense and like stressed and like, more, she was a disciplinarian but since he died, like, she's really kind of, yeah, oh yeah, like she's, you know, she's softened and she's really like funny and weird and silly and like strange. But yeah, she's, you know, like both of them love traveling. And so they like kind of, I think I got like this like broad worldview from them. And like they both were observers and they both like, my mom is super, my mom is sort of, she always wanted to be, she tells this story of like wanting to be a fashion designer when she was younger, like, and how a teacher told her that like, she wasn't good enough at drawing. And so, she would never be a fashion designer. And so I think she just kind of like dropped it. So I think I have sort of like this like searching, like disciplinary interest that comes from her. Cause like she loves embroidery and she made baskets and she's a writer and she's a film programmer. And like, she just kind of has this very textured, like cultural sensibility that she really definitely passed down. Yeah, I don't know. It's a lot.
Did her, you know, what you call like her goofiness or whatever transfer to her writing? What kind of writing did she do? Or does she do? If she still writes?
Yeah, she does still write. She does this. She is part of this. She and her friend, who's a designer, have this company called Palm Beach Ghosts, where they write about, they do ghost writing basically for people who are like vanity biographies sort of. But, and I thought that first it would be kind of like, I don't know, the people that they've written books about have all been really interesting. Like, just these like 1,000,000-year-old, like Palm Beach, area, like, well, no, it's like that's what I thought it was going to be, but it was like the first doctor, you know, or the first Jewish doctor in like Palm Beach, or like, you know, the guy who invented Century Village, which is this like series of retirement communities. There was like a guy that worked on the Manhattan Project, like all of these. It's just, it's pretty interesting. So she did a lot of different kind of writing, like, but when I was in high school, her main thing was film. What she really kind of got into was she was hired to work at this nonprofit like cultural arts organization, like the Jewish Arts Foundation was what it was called. And they did a bunch of different programming, but the main thing that they did was this festival, the Palm Beach Jewish Film Festival. And my mom sort of like really jumped into that wholeheartedly, and it became kind of her like I think like it was like her real passion that she had never realized, you know. And she started going to all of these film festivals and like making all of these film festival friends the way I had comics friends who, you know, all over the world. And her festival was really critically acclaimed. Like it was funny because with my own work, I would find that if it was slightly edgy at all, she really didn't like it. And she would give me really horrible feedback. But then with her own festival, she was always kind of challenging the audience to kind of deal with these, you know, like it's a pretty conventional conservative audience. Like in Palm Beach County, there would be these people and they would be like, they would want to see Holocaust movies. They would want to see, you know, like Sounding of Israel movies. And my mom would have these movies that like didn't always portray Jewish people the best way, or like it would be about like, you know, gay Orthodox Jews or like Palestinians and Jews. You know, I don't know. And so it was funny because, you know, she had this like edgy, she definitely wanted to be edgy, but then like when I did it, she didn't like it, but.
Yeah. But I mean, if she was successful doing it, I don't know, you know, parents are always like that. They don't want you to.
Yeah. You can't give too much, you can't like think about it too much. It's not really about like pleasing your parents.
Yeah. To come to the paintings, are you getting exhausted, by the way?
No, I'm sorry. I talk so much, so I'm just like, I'm happy to talk.
That's okay. Me too. We can keep going. I mean, it's easier on
okay.
me, I guess, but just let me know whenever.
Direct me however you want. So.
Well, I've got questions, so I just kind of go back to my notes or my questions, and then whatever. We should talk about your paintings. In one of your interviews, you said that Ariel, your sister, said, "What's up with these paintings?" And you couldn't really express them, but it was like a chance to like break out and do something big and, different and in a studio and so on. I was just wondering, had you gotten any more insight at all into what you're trying to say with those? Is that you, in the nudes, or is it just a generic figure?
I think it's a generic figure. It's like I definitely relate to her physically, but I also but like she changes. She doesn't have the same body in like every painting, or the same face.
What kind of paint are you using too? I wanted to just ask you about the materials as well, but please.
It's actually it's actually not paint. It's I'm using pastels and charcoal. Yeah, like I took a while in the studio kind of figuring out what medium, like what materials to use. And this was sort of like the most economical and the most kind of, it was like a really interesting kind of compromise between drawing and painting. Like I could kind of go back and forth as needed, like within the drawing. So yeah, I've been using pastels. I think that I just sort of am feeling like a lot of just like moods and attitudes and like opinions about my own presence, like I know that like when Trump was elected, I just sort of like, on the one hand, I felt like I wanted to hide and like protect my physical being, but then also I also knew that like my mere physical being was almost sort of existed in opposition to like everything that he is about. Right. So it was like I kind of wanted to be like a visible, in his parlance, like a visible 3, or like whatever he would rate me. I don't even know, but like I just like this whole idea of like of looking at people and like in this like horrible, creepy, like inhuman lens,
bullying,
like I just wanted
kind of way, yeah.
I wanted to be like, someone described a drawing as like being kind of confrontational but calm, and I sort of, and right. I really like that because I think that I like calm and confrontational but kind of like goofy and light but also unmoving, I guess.
Right.
Like I don't know. It's hard because it's getting to the point where like, when I got in there, I'd been doing this illustration project, and then I also was doing the Paris Review comics. But like, I had like a lot of savings, and now I'm like, it's getting to be like financially less practical for me to keep the studio and to keep doing these drawings for like nothing. But it's like the thing that I am most interested in at like this moment. Like next week it might be different, but it's like it's hard for me to pull myself away to do work on comics right now.
I guess the objective is to have a show when you feel like you've gotten to a point that you're ready to put them together.
I mean, it wasn't originally. Originally, it really was just for me. Like I just wanted to like, kind of like mess around and like see what it revealed. But then I thought that it would be cool because like they were coming out good, like once I kind of got on a roll, I thought it would be nice to have a show, but I don't really know where or if or how that would happen, but but maybe.
Yeah, well, now that you talk about it, I can sort of kind of understand, I guess. I couldn't really before. I mean, unlike the earlier stuff you talked about where you were kissing a boyfriend or whatever in a car, the narrative frame isn't really there. It's much more kind of subtle and, I suppose, expressive. It made me think of, but this is one of like those random things. It's probably got nothing to do with nothing that you were thinking about, but it made me think of that Picasso painting, The Ladies of Avignon. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. You know the one, right?
Oh,
the
yeah.
famous one? Yeah. Especially the second and the third woman from the left. Just the way they're looking at you, or just the way the expressions on their face.
Are you talking about the drawing with like the women that have like three different colored faces?
Yeah.
I don't know which drawing you're referring to.
They're not like super cubist. I think they're supposed to be prostitutes. There's like 5 of them, and they're in different.
Oh! You're talking about his painting.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not talking about
any
particular one of yours. I just meant that I thought of that painting. Yeah. And I don't know.
I have to look.
Yeah, that's just what I thought of. Something about the poses.
The second one.
Expressions.
The second one from the left?
The second and the third. Because they're looking at you more directly. Yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but...
Yeah, me either. Well, but that's cool. I have to take a look.
In a way, though, even if it's not you, then it sort of like becomes about you, I guess, in a more, like in a different kind of abstract way. It kind of comes back around to an expression of your frustration.
Yeah, it's definitely, like, when I tried to draw, like, I was like, I would like to draw someone else. Like, I would like to draw some, as an illustrator, you want to have, like, diversity, in, like, crowd scenes. You want to draw people of, like, different races and different skin colors and stuff. And I was like, I became aware that I was, like, drawing, like, the same, like, white lady over and over again. And I was, and since she's not me, it's like, what's the decision to make, every painting of this white person. And then I was like, I felt, I think that there is something very like personal about the way I'm presenting them in a way. Like when I drew the man, I drew one man and I was like, this feels different because I'm like, with the naked ladies, I'm not objectifying. Like, I mean, I guess they could be seen as such, but it doesn't feel like that. Like when it's more like I feel like they're like presenting themselves. And like when I was drawing the man, I like kind of couldn't do that because I like couldn't, I mean, I could to like some extent, but it's still like definitely like a man and not
maybe that amount of vulnerability is not quite there.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just a random thing, but one thing I wanted
not that I can't. Sorry to interrupt, but not that I can't see myself in men or in people of other, skin colors and stuff. Just like there's like something about this character that I keep drawing that like it both is and isn't me. But like it's like it's not. Yeah. It doesn't feel like a self-portrait because she changes and it's not like my body. But it definitely does feel like enough like me that when I draw someone else, it feels weird.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. The colors are really nice, like.
Thanks.
Yeah, like you're great with color, obviously. In your interviews, you mentioned Jaime Hernandez and how like discovering his comics had really, you just became like obsessed with them. And I think I couldn't watch the whole thing, but I watched a little bit of the video where you were at the Strand and the person who was interviewing you way back when you were promoting Make Me a Woman.
Oh, yeah.
You were talking about that. But the difference, and I love Jaime. I love his stuff. I love Gilbert too, although it's the earlier stuff by Gilbert that like really affects me. But the thing about Jaime though is that even though he like is really realistic with bodies and he's just like devoted to his characters and he kind of like moves with them through time and he jumps around, I think it's still like it's that male gaze thing. It's still looked at through, like, whenever I look at his panels, I sort of start salivating because whether the women are overweight or whatever, there's such a kind of a gaze on them. They're just so beautiful, and they're so alluring, and they're just fascinating.
Yeah, they're definitely loved.
That male fascination with women. Whereas when you do your paintings or your cartoons, it's the vulnerability that comes out. They're not being gazed upon, but you're sort of identifying with them. There's a warm identification. There's something else that you've got. I'm not sure about the paintings, because I have to sort of, I think, really, and even your more recent cartoons, I think I'm going to need time probably to really like digest them and to try to form an opinion about them, whatever that means. But generally, I think you have more of a, I don't know, I guess it's just that warm vulnerability. Like you're comfortable swimming in your pain, I think.
Yeah.
And then there's more of a connection between the reader, the author, and the actual work itself. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I mean, I love Jaime for a lot of reasons, but I definitely don't think that we're similar, if that makes sense. Like I think that like I think that we do really different kinds of things. But it's like when I did discover his work, one thing that it's like, you never know what about someone's work is going to speak to you, and and one of the things that I noticed when I got into his work was that Trevor introduced it to me. Like I had never really read any Love and Rockets, right. So it was right around the time that I like fell in love with Trevor and was like moving to California, and Jaime, writes this like very Californian story about these like Latina girls who like live here in California. And even though like the area, they're like not specific, there's like a real kind of like, I wasn't moving to Southern California, but I was moving to like kind of a relatively small town. Like I was, on the West Coast. And yeah, it's a Santa Rosa. And I was kind of like going from like a kind of like a competitive East Coast, like cultural kind of standard to a smaller town where like people were, I don't know, like the expectations were like the ambitions were like a little bit more regional. They weren't really like as high as they are in New York. It's like New York is like a really competitive place. And I just sort of liked how like dignified and stately the characters were, even though they were like, just like, I don't even, like Maggie's in it, like a part, like she's sort of like this, like, at the time, the stuff I was reading was like when she was younger, and she was just like, they were just like these like punk rockers who were like rolling from like apartment to apartment. And they weren't like, they were all like poor and like just kind of,
they have spunk though.
They weren't like, they weren't like high succeeding people. They were like, they were gritty. And like, I really liked how he portrayed them with so much like, humanity and like dignity, I guess, and like nobility. And intelligence.
Well, you had to do the work to connect the dots,
Yeah, and I just felt like it was like a really nice. It was like a good thing to read, like while transitioning from like a big city to a smaller town, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know, I see other cartoonists kind of connecting to your work, although I don't know if you feel that. Like Linda Barry, Roz Chast, I see them, and in terms of males, I see like a little bit of Richard Sala or Maurice Velacoop, but I don't know. The Debbie Dreschler I felt too, for sure. Well,
I love all of those artists. Like I love Richard Sala and I love Linda Barry. Like it's like I know that I've like definitely been influenced by them for sure.
Yeah. But since you mentioned Trevor, I have to ask, is it hard to, I mean, obviously you've been in a committed relationship for a long time, so I'm sure it's not an issue, but is it hard to work with somebody else or to live with somebody else who does the same thing that you do? Does it ever become kind of tense or competitive? is that like one of the issues you mentioned, whether to have a kid? Like, are you worried that if you have a kid, that'll derail your ability to kind of progress on your artistic kind of thrust?
Yeah, like basically being a partner with a cartoonist is amazing in the sense that like, there's someone who understands your priorities, and vice versa. So it's like, I think it would be really hard for like a non-cartoonist to understand like how much time, you need, like, and not just time, but like time that's like not pressured, to get work done, or to even like not get work done, but like that's still part of the anyway. So I think that like, I definitely don't feel like we've had competition. I think that like, so
there's no tension or claustrophobia that comes from that.
No. I mean, we also do really different comics, but
right.
like I feel like, and I think that we've influenced each other a lot. But like, I think the only bad thing, everything has been positive, except for the fact that we're like doubling down on our poverty.
Yeah.
It would be way better for him to like be married to a doctor and for me to be married to like a lawyer or whatever. But like,
but at least
or something like that.
At least they get it. Like,
yeah.
if I ever go on a date with a doctor or somebody who's just like really successful, or even somebody who's like comfortably middle class, that anxiety is that beating at the back of my brain. Like, and many times I'm right. They don't really get it. Like, they sort of find it interesting that you create something or that you do something or whatever. But when it gets down to the sticks and stones of how you budget for that and what you give up, both in terms of activities and time as well.
It's high maintenance. It's a high maintenance lifestyle for sure.
I wouldn't say it's high maintenance. It's just, it requires sacrifice. And I think we don't really live in a culture that gets, pinching the belt.
Well, that's what I mean. I mean it's high maintenance in the way that like being a vegan or something is high maintenance.
Right,
it's like, it's particular.
Right.
It's
more focused.
It's like it's particular. It's like you can't look at things the way everyone looks at things, like lifestyle wise and logistically. I wrestle with it myself, just because like I grew up I guess, I don't know, like tenuously middle class. Like I grew up around a lot, like everyone I knew was wealthy, but my dad was like a freelance photojournalist, like supporting our family. And there were times when we had like nothing and times when we had like tons of money. And like, I didn't know, I was completely sheltered from like knowing when that, when those times were. I think that like, also it was a different time. Like you could be a freelance photojournalist and like support a family of 4 in the 80s, but like, times are definitely different. So I guess if anything, there's tension just coming from like both the fact that both of us want to be cartoonists and that that's important to each of us. And so yes, that means something about like our household, like economically and like, yes, like, having a kid is like something I think about that, about how it would pull both of us away from like our work. And like, that can be fine. I don't know that like, it's like funny because I feel like I've always been like this person who has felt that life was more important than art. Because I think that like without life, you don't have anything to make art about. But at the same time, here I am, like I'm the one that's saying that, but then I'm the one of like all of the, like I'm the one who's like still an artist,
Right.
So I've sort of like made that my life, whether I meant to or not. But yeah, I think it's mostly positive living with Trevor. Like we could, because we get it. Like he gets it and I get it. And like he's someone who I like base all of my, like if I'm doing well, it's like I want, his opinion is like the most important. And like, and he is who helps me like set that standard. 'Cause he's like, I just think 'cause he's so brilliant and like, and sensitive and like, and so intelligent. So I think that I really rely on him a lot, as my partner. like to help me with my work, and hopefully I help him back. I don't know.
That's amazing. What a wonderful thing to be able to say. Like, what a blessing, to be able to say that. I think.
No, I'm very lucky.
So if we were to have this conversation 10 years from now, what would you like to have happened? Maybe not specifically, maybe in a more abstract sense or whatever.
I don't know. I guess hopefully in 10 years I will have like made decisions that have led me to like some comfort and satisfaction and happiness. Like hopefully I'm like doing work that I like and like and I'm feeling like comfortable and safe and but like still challenged. It's like figuring out my goals kind of has always been hard for me. It like ties in with like not wanting to like make decisions about like how things are going to be completed. Like both like in art and in life. So it's hard to like kind of think more specifically about it.
So it's more of a state of mind and how you're feeling as opposed to what you've achieved, maybe?
Yeah, definitely.
Do you feel you're far from that? I think that you're not. You're illustrating, you're doing comics, you're exploring new ground.
I mean, it's interesting. I think that like it's sort of a weird career path just because I don't think it's necessarily a career, in the sense that like nobody makes money from making comics, so you always have to like be doing a lot of different things, either by having another job or by doing different things within comics and illustration than maybe you would if you didn't have to worry about, like if it was a paying job, because it's not, So it's kind of like when I decided to kind of make comics, to really get serious about comics, like when I moved away from New York and like away from my day job and saw that kind of comics were becoming a little bit more relevant and like popular. I saw some older cartoonists like teaching and doing illustration, and I was like, okay, well, this looks like this is opening up to become a job in some form or another. Like maybe, like I should open myself up to being available to this. And I did, but it also is like there's no real path. Like it's hard to know what steps come next, like it's not like moving up in a company or like going to school and then doing a residency and then becoming a doctor. It's like kind of all uncharted in a way.
At least you shouldn't manage any more apartment buildings for the rest of your life.
Well, now I know. Now I know not to do that again.
So it's interesting. Like that seems to be like, I think, part and parcel of your life. It's just always kind of trying to respond to those kind of concerns and stuff, and that's a big part of where your art comes from, I'm sure. So I'm sure there will be lots more interesting, fruits of that garden.
Oh, well, from your mouth to God's ears, as Jewish people like to say.
Yeah. I hope he's listening or she's listening.
Whoever. Thanks.
I don't know if you got a chance to check out that Picasso picture, but if you did, like, are you in front of a computer, or I'm just really curious if...
Hold on, let me get my computer. I went into the bedroom.
Sure.
Hold on.
Go for it. You know the painting I mean, though, right? The title, The Ladies of Avignon?
Yeah, Demoiselle.
Yes.
Yeah, I can find it.
I wasn't brave enough to try the French.
I'm not. Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah. Do you see?
Because they're like. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, because they're half. They're like all abstracted and painterly, but then also like kind of drawn, with like these cartoony eyes, and then they're like looking right at you, and they're like being sexy, but also kind of morose.
Yeah.
But also kind of like just humanistic. I don't know. That's cool.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad.
Not to compare myself, but I definitely see I think I see what you're saying.
Yeah. I'm glad I wasn't totally out of left field. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time. I mean, I knew it would be a pleasure, but thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for letting me ramble for so long, and thank you again. Your insights and what you've written about my work, I just really appreciate, and that's very illuminating and helpful. So thank you.
That's a pleasure of this, is I get to pick people's minds whose work I love or affects me, and so it's great.
Vanessa's site is spanielrage.com, on Twitter at Squintables. We'd love to hear from you. Write us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com or look us up on Patreon, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. All our social media links can be found on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. Also, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Our theme is from bensound.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. The latest episode is right behind this one in the podcast feed. We talk about two very different comics, Dawn of War #1 and Snow Cone City, Rocket to Pluto. This coming Thursday on To the Bat Poles, it's the campiest Joker yet, but also a somehow more human Joker in Pop Goes the Joker and Flop Goes the Joker. Look up To the Bat Poles wherever you find your podcast or at tothebatpoles.libsyn.com. If you've been digging through the archives or just listening to this podcast for most of its run, you'll remember our friend in San Francisco, Matt Sility. Next week, he comes back into his occasional role of hooking me up with an interesting interview with T. Bui, who moved to the U.S. from Vietnam as a young child. She writes about the 20th century history of Vietnam through the eyes of 3 generations of her family in The Best We Could Do. I'll be talking with her here next week about how she learned to do comics as a method of telling her story, and how she's now found herself teaching comics. And we'll also get caught up with what Matt's been doing. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.